And Brett, there's always a surprise team who picks a wide receiver in round 1. It's never perfectly clean for us. I think it's LA. I think LA is the wide receiver landing spot this year. 22, it seems about right for a player of this talent. So Washington wide receiver Denzel Boston, the Chargers.
Well, I love the player team fit, no doubt about that. So Boston's my wide receiver 3, by the way. I think he's awesome. I think the dude, I see so many people writing up like on Twitter, like bad athleticism. I'm like, he's not a bad athlete. Like he might not be a 4.3 guy, but he's not a bad athlete. He can jump out of the gym. He's explosive. The lateral quickness for his size is ridiculous. So I think he's awesome.
Yeah, I really like the Boston fit, and I like the landing spot here.
That's him. That's the OG.
Post-free agency 2026 NFL mock draft, Theo Gremminger and Brett Whitefield. We're breaking down the entire first round. Brett, we're sort of in the end game now. The draft is right on the horizon. Things are starting to come into place. We now know some of team needs have been filled, and we're going to attempt to predict which way teams are going to go in the first round as of today. We're not doing trades today, Brett, but my question for you is, do you think this is going to be an active year for trades during the NFL draft first round?
I'm going to say no. I know the fans don't want to hear that. They're like, we want trades. It's exciting. But like, think about it. There's really one stud quarterback. There's not any like truly, blue chip edge rushers. There's no blue chip offensive tackles. So it's like, who are people trading up for? And, maybe you start running into a positional scarcity situation, like defensive tackle's a little light in this year's class. Maybe you see a team move a couple spots at the back end of the first round to get the tackle they want. But ultimately, I just don't think there's going to be a ton of movement. There's not a need for it.
Yeah, I think that the beginning of the top 10, where you've got the 3 edge rushers that all could go inside the top 10, and one of them could go as high as 2 overall. I think it sort of is like, unless there's some shock team trading up from maybe outside of the top 9, then I don't necessarily see it. One quarterback's going to go inside the first round potentially, and definitely one goes inside the top 10 in Fernando Mendoza. So it doesn't feel like a year where people are going to be reaching, but you never know. There could be more activity and movement once we get sort of into like pick 10 and beyond. And then I think there could be actually a lot of movement like the end of the first round, especially if we start seeing like a cluster of wide receivers all starting to go. But who knows? And we're going to be covering every single minute of the NFL draft right here at Fantasy Points. We're giving you the best possible fantasy football coverage anywhere of the 2026 NFL draft. Brett Whitefield and I are hosting. We're going hard in the paint 2 straight days, day 1 and day 2. We're going to be joined by John Hansen. We're going to be joined by Scott Barrett, Ryan Heath, Tom Brawley, Joe Dolan, Jacob Sanderson, Thomas Tipple, and more. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, Brett, but it's fantastic. We did it last year, and this year we're taking it up another notch. And then our day 3 coverage will be hosted by the Dynasty Points crew. That's always a lot of fun as well. So make sure you are subscribed to Fantasy Points YouTube and check out our NFL draft coverage. Brett, which way are we starting today? Are you picking first or am I picking first?
I'm picking first.
Okay, you're first. You got a pretty easy one.
I wanted to ask you, should I pull a Dan Orlovsky and just go Ty Simpson here? Oh
my gosh. I mean, I don't think so. Ty Simpson will be an interesting one to see where he goes today, if he goes in the first round. Yeah. It's a huge name, and I think if you're a dynasty fantasy football manager, like Ty Simpson going in the top 20 picks would have a big impact on the value of your late first round dynasty picks. As for the NFL, I have some question marks about him. I don't really have question marks about Fernando Mendoza. I think we sort of know what he is. I'm assuming you're going to take him here, Brett.
Yeah, Fernando Mendoza, quarterback, Indiana. First overall to the Raiders, joining Clint Kubiak.
Yeah, Mendoza makes sense. It's a sort of an easy pick. And then I think the rest of the top 10, it actually takes some thought, and there's multiple names I think we could attach to multiple teams. Starting at 2 with the Jets, I've mocked Arvell Reese to this spot multiple times. I've had arguments with you about this one, just the way you think Aaron Glenn and the Jets, the direction they're going into. I think there's a lot of teams that are going to be chasing that Micah Parsons archetype with Arvell Reese, but I don't think it's going to be two to the Jets. I think Reese will go very soon in the next few picks. But I think for the Jets, it's going to ultimately come down to, if they stay on this pick, it's going to ultimately come down to Rueben Bain versus David Bailey, and internally, which player offers them more as an impact edge rusher on their defense. I could go both ways on this one. I think ultimately there's a lot of Rueben Bain faders out there. They don't like the things about like the wingspan, but I think ultimately this is the way the Jets are going to go. They're going to take Rueben Bain at 2 overall, and I think that's going to Bailey versus Bain to me is an interesting one, Brett. But I think at the end of the day, Bain's just too good of a prospect for them at 2, and they're going to go in that direction.
Yeah, especially when you consider the wingspan stuff is fake, and David Bailey is pretty light in the pants for an Aaron Glenn style defense. So I think that's the right pick, Theo.
Yeah,
the Arvell Reese stuff is really interesting, and I want to soapbox for a sec because you said something that struck me. Teams are going to chase the Micah Parsons player comparison. That's how teams stay bad. Micah Parsons has happened one time. One time in the history of the NFL have you had an off-ball linebacker transition to edge and him be a dominant all-pro type force. Go ahead and chase outliers all you want. You're going to be a bad football team if you do that. Arvell Reese is an off-ball linebacker to me, not an edge rusher. So just wanted to soapbox for a second. 3 overall, Theo. I'm going to go the guy we've had penciled in here for seems like 2 months now, Francis Mauigoa, offensive tackle from Miami.
Yeah, talk about that one, because I think you're starting to see some like mixed opinions on which way Arizona goes. You ultimately feel like it's going to be an offensive lineman here, and not trying to address like the pass rush. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Well, as of right now, and there's some heat, coming that they might try to move Josh Sweat. I think he might want to reunite with his defensive former head coach John Gannon, who's now in Green Bay. But as of now, he's still on the roster, and he's a very good pass rusher, so I think they're probably safer there. They have a big hole at right tackle. They've lost Jonah Williams in free agency. Technically, they haven't lost him yet. He hasn't signed anywhere, but he's a free agent. And that offensive line otherwise looks pretty good. They brought in Isaac Seumalo to play left guard. They got a bookend tackle and Paris Johnson. They need the other side now. And I think Mauigoa is the best offensive tackle prospect in this class, and he's perfect for the LaFleur-Shanahan type scheme here. So we're gonna go Mauigoa to play right tackle for us.
And now we're back with another potential edge rusher pick. I think Tennessee could go in that direction here. We've talked about Carnell Tate. I feel like the Wan'Dale Robinson signing, they're very, very different. But the idea of Tennessee going wide receiver as their big free agent signing and a wide receiver at 4, I think that they're more likely to use that early second-round pick on a wide receiver, and possibly they're a trade-up candidate, Brett, where if their guy starts falling past 25, they can trade up from the early second into the late first. We've seen that in multiple seasons past. Beat reporter Easton Freeze, who we're in a dynasty league with, very sharp in his Titans coverage, is he's circled the beginning of the second and the beginning of the third as big wide receiver landing spots for them. So I think it's not Tate. I think that Jeremiyah Love is absolutely in play here, and I think he's going to go somewhere in this 4 through 7 range. The other names that would be pretty easy picks in terms of pointing them towards Tennessee would be Reese and David Bailey. We've gone back and forth on this one, Brett, a number of times. Ultimately, I think this is going to end up being Jeremiyah Love, though. I think this is Jeremiyah Love. And I think if there is a trade-up spot, Brett, I think it's this one. Because if there's a team that thinks Tennessee, New York, and Washington all want Love, there might be a surprise team that moves up and tries to jump those teams. This could be the trade-up spot that we're like, there's not going to be trades. 4 is the spot that I think it could happen. So I'm going to lock in Jeremiyah Love here at 4 overall to Tennessee. I think what this would do is you'd end up seeing another running back sort of moved probably on day 2. You could see Tony Pollard, not a Tennessee Titan. It sort of wouldn't make sense there. They still have Tyjae Spears on his rookie contract, so I think he's more likely the safer one. But I think they end up with Jeremiyah Love here at 4, and then we see sort of a fun Tony Pollard landing spot maybe on day 2, similarly to what Detroit did a couple years back, where they draft Jahmyr Gibbs at 12, and then they moved DeAndre Swift like 2 days later to the Philadelphia Eagles. I think that's sort of where we could see Pollard. So I'm going to say Jeremiyah Love 4 overall to Tennessee. Tennessee gets their offensive focal point and a player they can build around in Love.
Love the player team fit for sure. That's a good one.
Where are you at here now, number 5? This is another really fun pick here. You feel like New York's going with a defensive player. They've continually been linked to a couple of high-end defensive players here at 5. They've also been linked to Love.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go. I had 2 players in my mind. You took one of them in Jeremiyah Love. So I'm going to go Sonny Styles, the linebacker from Ohio State. Best off-ball linebacker, I think, to come out probably since Roquan Smith. So there's a few of those in this class, like best sense type players, but they all play non-premium positions. So it's a fun kind of debate to have and figure out where these guys are going to go. But I mean, I know they brought in Tremaine Edmonds, but I think Tremaine can play the will. Sonny Styles can also play the will. I think having both those guys on the field opens up a ton of opportunity in pass coverage. So boom.
Yeah, this one makes a ton of sense, and there's been a lot of steam with the New York beat reporters about Sonny Styles ending up becoming a New York Giant. Next level athleticism, one of the better linebacker prospects we've seen in quite some time, and he's a plug-and-play guy for them. Really interesting to see which direction they end up in, but I think Styles, there'd be a lot of like A grades for New York, and you get Harbaugh, and it's sort of like keep building on this front 7 strength. The idea of Sonny Styles with those edge rushers that they have, with that talent that they have on the defensive line, Brett, like New York's not a perfect team, but that gives them a problem for pretty much any team that they face up against. You better be really, really ready to block against those New York Giants this year. And that's the kind of player you add for a quick turnaround. Harbaugh hire feels like one of those things. She'd get Jackson Dart last year and then follow up with this sort of pick. So I'm into it. Your thoughts on Styles' impact in that defense? I know you have broke them down a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Styles is awesome. Like I said, I think he's the best linebacker that's come out since Roquan Smith. He, the range, the athleticism, but he's also plays with a ton of football IQ. He's willing to be a take-on player as well. He did that for Arvell Reese, where for first guard to come to the second level, I'm taking him head on and let the other linebacker clean it up. He's a really sound player, all around. And then you talked about the D-line he'd be playing behind. I mean, how do you get a hat on Sonny Styles when you have to block Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns and Abdul Carter and Kayvon Thibodeau? So it's a really, really fascinating situation.
Yeah, definitely would be an interesting one. I think from a fantasy lens, it might be a defense that we end up rostering all season long. Back on the clock here with the Cleveland Browns at 6. This has been a team that we have linked to offensive line throughout the process. The last time we did this, you had them taking another offensive lineman. We've linked them to Mauigoa for a while. We linked them to Monroe Freeling. For me, I think that this is where free agency comes into play. And I think that they've done so much on the offensive line, Brett. They've signed multiple linemen, and I think they feel pretty good about where they're at. One position that they haven't addressed is wide receiver. Last year, they hit a huge with Harold Fannin Jr. In the 3rd round. They hit, I think, pretty well with Quinshon Judkins at the beginning of the 2nd round. Now they have an opportunity to add another skill position talent, sort of build this team up. The last 2 drafts are big, big influence on their skill positions, and I think they continue that. I think that they pass on. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on them to take Caleb Downs in-state, the superstar safety, but I think ultimately the value of a wide receiver on a rookie contract for them to get Carnell Tate here at 6, I think is going to be very, very appealing. And I think Carnell Tate steps into a good situation. I believe in Todd Monken, and I believe in a chance for him to become like an offensive focal point in this offense. People are not going to love this landing spot fantasy-wise, but ultimately he becomes a clear-cut wide receiver 1 in this offense. And Harold Fannin Jr. is fantastic, but there's a capped target ceiling with a player like him in this offense, especially when you consider he's 22 years old. So even if Harold Fannin takes a big step forward target-wise, you're talking about a 130 target season for Fannin, not going to get to like that McBride level as a 22-year-old. So Tate, I think, has a chance to lead Cleveland in targets as a rookie, and that's important for us. So I'm going to go Carnell Tate here at 6 overall, another fantasy landing spot.
Yeah, I like that. I think early on for dynasty purposes, you could see Tate struggle a little bit just because quarterback play is subpar. Cleveland's going to mess around with some heavier personnel as well. So, but yeah, ultimately, he has a clear runway to becoming a wide receiver one in the NFL and eventually hitting that 140 target threshold that you see your traditional wide receiver one hit. So I like that.
Which way are you going here with the Washington Commanders?
I'm actually going to go, maybe this is the first wild card of the draft. I'm going to go with the best offensive lineman in the draft, and that's Vega Ioane, guard from Penn State. You look at what they did in free agency, and you mentioned it with the Browns and what they accomplished on the O-line. Well, Washington's done nothing. However, they have brought in 3 edge rushers and Odafe Owe, Caleb Chason, Charles Omenihu. They spent good money. They backed up their defensive tackle situation, bringing Tim Settle back into the fold. They signed a starting box safety, a starting Mike linebacker, a starting nickel corner. So I think they got to go to the offensive side of the ball. And, you could definitely consider wide receiver here. I think this is a good draft to wait on wide receiver. There's so many good ones. However, the best offensive lineman in the draft is sitting there right in their face at 7, who's going to start at left guard for them. And you start to look on paper, man, this offensive line's really coming together. Josh Connerly stepping into year 2 at right tackle. Laramie Tunsil still a very good left tackle, and now you have a premium talent there at left guard to go with some solid players at center and right guard. So I think this is a really good spot for Vega, and I think this is the kind of draft it is where the top players at these positions are going to go a little bit earlier than normal.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is a year where we see Sonny Styles go off the board inside the top 5, and then you see an interior offensive lineman, a guard, going inside the top 10. It's a little bit early, but I mean, everybody who's breaking down these offensive line prospects just absolutely loves Ioane. And you give a chance to add a foundational all-pro type offensive lineman to Washington. So look at what they did last year. They addressed the tackle position. Now they go in the interior O-line. A lot riding on Jaden Daniels for this franchise. So I don't think they're going to mess around. I thought you were going to say Monroe Freeling at first, and then I'm like, okay, Vega Ioane, I know you've been a huge fan of his, so I get it. Might seem a little early for some, but I think his floor might be Baltimore at 14. I think he's going to go somewhere in these next 7 picks. So it's a reach, but it's not that much of a reach.
And I don't honestly, Theo, I think he's a lock to go top 10 personally. So I don't even think it's a reach.
Well, there we go. Fantasy Points is your place to be for the best fantasy football coverage around for the NFL draft. Brett and I are streaming all day on day 1 and day 2. Well, I guess it would really be all night on day 1. Not all day, but day 2 will be a really, really fun one. Joined by John Hansen, Scott Barrett, Joe Dolan, and many, many more. The whole Fantasy Points crew is going to be joining us, and maybe some special guests as well. It's going to be awesome. Make sure you are subscribed to Fantasy Points YouTube for our coverage of the NFL Draft. I'm OTC with the Saints, and this is a team that we know doesn't trade back. They never trade back. New Orleans, as a franchise, I don't think they've traded back for like 20 years now, Brett. It's like 20 plus
years. Not in
the
first round,
yeah,
no.
Not in the first round. They don't trade back from the first round. So we think they're going to stay OTC. And this is a spot where I think that they would have loved to have Tate fall to them and just take the wide receiver at 8. That's off the table. So now I think they're looking at best player available. I think that there's a wild card here in Mansoor Delane, who I think with an LSU connection there, it's going to be an interesting one. They could also use another corner. But ultimately, they're staring at 2 of the draft's top prospects in Arvell Reese and David Bailey. This is a spot that I think taking Arvell Reese, it becomes worth the risk. And I think that they go with Arvell Reese here over Bailey and also over Caleb Downs. But Saints sitting here with a ton of defensive talent on the board, maybe 4 guys in play. I think if there was maybe better health reports with guys like Jordyn Tyson, that he could be in play here. But I think that they ultimately go on the defensive side of the ball if Tate's off the board, and I'm going Arvell Reese off the board at 8 overall.
Yeah, I like that. I'm not a huge Arvell guy. We know that, right? But the scheme that Brandon Staley's going to run, it is an odd front. He does like those hybrid stand-up backers who can also drop into coverage, and so I think Arvell is a really nice fit for that defense for sure.
I think I can guess who you're going to take here at 9 for Kansas City. I'm just my lean.
Well, there's a few options, Theo. Let me talk through it real quick. So I'm thinking, they got gutted in their secondary in free agency with Josh Williams and the trade with Trent McDuffie, and then who's the other? Well, they lost the other guy too. Why can't I think of his name right now? Doesn't matter. They lost their three starting corners essentially. They drafted Noah Williams in the 3rd round last year, who looked great as a rookie. They brought in Oloie Gilman to shore up the free safety spot, and they brought in Kader Kohu. They still have Christian Fulton under contract too, and he makes a lot of money. So I was tempted to go Mansoor Delane here, but I'm actually not going to do it. I'm going to go with a tight end, Oregon tight end, Kenyon Sadiq, to eventually be the heir to the throne for Travis Kelce. This is a tricky one for me because I don't like teams that draft tight ends in the 1st round. They don't typically need them in the moment. You think about like Colson Loveland last year. They had Cole Kmet already on the roster, who's a very productive player, good blocker, and they still went ahead and drafted 110th overall. I think Kansas City's in a similar spot where they have Travis Kelce still in the fold. He did come back for one more year, but I think drafting his replacement now, they might not get another shot at it to do it so cleanly as Kenyon Sadiq. And I think Kenyon Sadiq, despite what the nerd community will tell you, I think he's a very, very good prospect.
Well, the nerds would be in shambles. The nerds would be in complete disarray because they would have to say, I don't like Kenyon Sadiq, but I'm not going to have any access to him, even though he was drafted 9th overall as one of the highest drafted tight ends in the history of the NFL draft. Oh, and he's attached to Patrick Mahomes in an Andy Reid offense, and Travis Kelce is dust, basically, at this point. No disrespect to Travis Kelce. I know he's not dust, but he's dusty enough that the ascension of Kenyon Sadiq could be very, very quick. Also, a lot of 12 personnel next year for sure. And we've seen Andy Reid use multiple tight end packages pretty much every year in KC. This would be an easy fit. Kenyon Sadiq at 9 overall, not the way I thought you were going to go here. It actually makes my pick incredibly difficult, Brett, because Cincinnati, I think, would be standing on their heads. They would have the chance to add David Bailey and have a chance to add a potential all-pro edge rusher on a team that really, really needs one. They need to add another player like this, but the problem is they're in the state of Ohio, and this could be Ed Reed. And you don't let Ed Reed leave the state of Ohio if he's an Ohio State Buckeye. And I think that's sort of what Caleb Downs is. And people are like, whatever, hyperbole. But I think Caleb Downs is a all-pro safety. And I think that the safety position is also in vogue right now. We've seen what Seattle was able to do last year. I think Caleb Downs, it's impossible for Cincinnati to pass on him at 10 overall. I think also Downs is a tremendous value here. We've seen people projecting Downs higher than this consistently. So I think Downs becomes a value at 10, and it's not like, oh, I just took a safety at 2 overall. You're taking a safety at 10. It's a little higher than you usually select a safety, but with this sort of player, he's as much of a can't-miss prospect as there is in this draft class on the defensive side of the ball. I'm going Caleb Downs, Ohio State safety, off the board, Cincinnati Bengals, doesn't leave the state of Ohio.
So in that scenario, do you have Downs playing in the box role, or are you moving Brian Cook there? Because it just paid Brian Cook a bunch of money.
I think this is you get them all on the field and you figure it out, Brett. And I'm not sure, you'd probably be better off with like the X and O's of how you maximize those two talents in the back. But I think at the end of the day, it's just the best player available is not David Bailey. It's Caleb Downs. Mm-hmm. And when you look at Cincinnati as a defense, they need a player like this. You lose Trey Hendrickson. Now it's like sort of a passing the torch. This is the focal point, the face of the defense, really like an opportunity to add a star back there. Bailey's an easier fit, but I think Cincinnati, when you start looking at some of the pieces they've added in the secondary, you added Downs back there, they can start doing something.
I look at it like this. They don't currently have a starting nickel. They have Jalen Davis, I think, currently slotted in that spot. But you look at Al Golden, the defensive coordinator, and his history, coming from a Bill Belichick tree, coach under Matt Patricia for a long time in Detroit as well, went to Notre Dame. He actually is one of these guys that likes to play three safeties. He likes having that strong overhang defender in the defense. So I think you're right. I think you play Dax Hill at outside corner, and then you play your three safeties, Jordan Battle, Brian Cook, and Caleb Downs, and they can all kind of interchange and be move pieces. And heavier sets, you move Battle into the box. And then when you got three wide receivers on the field, you move Downs into the nickel spot. I think it's a really good fit. In hindsight, I didn't think it right away when you said it, but now that I'm thinking through it, I think you're right.
Yeah, I think Downs is – I think he's going to be an awesome, awesome NFL player. So David Bailey falls out of the top 10, How far will he drop? We'll find out really soon. You're back OTC here at the 11 spot, Brett.
Miami has probably the worst cornerback room I've ever seen in my life. So it's easy just to go Mansoor Delane. I know they brought in Darrell Baker Jr. over from Tennessee, but he's not a needle mover at all, right? Just a functional body.
Delane makes so much sense. I mean, just from a fit wise, you know.
Yeah, and they're kind of moneyballing that edge position, right? I think they brought in Josh Uche and David Ajabo, so I think they probably feel okay there with Chop Robinson and Zach Seiler and Kenneth Grant on the D line. Let's go Mansoor Delane. I think he's the best player available other than Bailey. So let's go Mansoor Delane, cornerback LSU. Yeah, and this is a weird free fall for Bailey that I did not anticipate.
Yeah, I didn't anticipate this one either. I considered Bailey. We talked about him at 2 overall. Now he's OTC at 12. This could end up being the steal of the entire draft, and Dallas will stop the free fall. Dallas is going to take David Bailey here at 12. Just an easy layup pick for them. And I think they would love being in this situation, Brett, where Mansoor Delane or David Bailey, and both of those guys are on the clock. They're like, okay, we're going to take either one of them. I think if you would have gone Bailey, I would have gone with the cornerback here. Dallas has been linked to a defender at 12, and I think they're sort of open-minded with which player they select. So if you're talking about team needs, they also have 20 overall. So for me, 12 is the luxury pick for Dallas. They're going to take BPA, best player available, most likely a defender, just based on the cluster of players we're projecting to be available in this range. And Dallas ends up with a potential star in David Bailey, who also showed up at the Combine. Incredibly productive player last year at Texas Tech. Just a plug-and-play, get to the quarterback guy at the next level. Really love this fit. Dallas just sort of lands perfectly with Bailey in this range.
And Bailey, honestly, is so perfect for their scheme. It's almost like we planned it out this way. But he's perfect for a Christian Parker scheme where he's going to be more of your stand-up rusher. He can definitely put his hand in the dirt, but in that base odd front, like he's perfect for that. And you also have a nice trio now with Ezeraku, Rashawn Gary, and David Bailey. So very nice.
Ezeraku was a huge Brett Whitefield guy last year. So they're starting to add a few of these. Bailey and Ezeraku, you're loving life down there in Dallas.
Heck yeah.
Okay, so 13 overall. I know you want to say my guy Makai Lemon here at 13, right?
I can tell you who I don't want to say.
Okay, so which way are you going with these LA Rams?
This is a tough one because I think was really hoping like a Mansoor Delane would be available to them here. They've done some work in the secondary, bringing over Jalen Watson. That's his name, the other corner from KC, Trent McDuffie. But I think adding some talent on the defensive side of the ball still makes sense. I just don't know. Man, this is kind of a sticky picky here. Let's go. I'm going to pivot a little bit. I know the Rams fans really like Warren McClendon and what he gave them last year. My guy Lance Crawford too, who's a big Rams fan. He really liked Warren McClendon, but I think the talent's too good to pass on with Spencer Fano here, the Utah tackle. Primarily a right tackle in college anyway, so it's kind of a natural fit. Like, I don't know that I'm trusting Warren McClendon to repeat what he did last year as a late round pick and a guy who's doesn't have a ton of pedigree. I'm going to go Spencer Fano. Worst case scenario, Fano ends up playing guard for me, and we have both of them on the field. But I think for now he competes for that right tackle spot. We're keeping Stafford clean.
So I know you're a big Monroe Freeling guy. This is specifically because of the needs of LA.
Yeah, Freeling's a left tackle might need a little developmental runway, and they've got left tackle pretty much locked up with Alaric Jackson, who's a better player than Warren McClendon.
So I'm back OTC with the Baltimore Ravens, and this is an interesting one. I think Vega Ioane would have been the pick for sure. Weeks ago we thought this could have been a Sonny Styles one before the Combine, and he went absolutely bonkers there. For me at 14. I keep gravitating towards what Baltimore has done this offseason, and the hire that they make at offensive coordinator, where they get Declan Doyle, 29-year-old from Chicago, attached to the Ben Johnson scheme, and they've talked about building an innovative scheme around Lamar Jackson. And to me, if you're going to go innovative here, I think Kenyon Sadiq would have been an interesting player if he was still OTC here. Even though they re-signed Mark Andrews, just because the ways that they could have used those two guys in 12, how much they used likely with Andrews, and then just the age of Sadiq. It's sort of the passing of the torch narrative. But I think ultimately, when you look at innovative, you look at being able to have players who can accumulate first downs. You look at improving the pass-catching weapons around Lamar Jackson. Two things are going to happen here, Brett. This Ravens offense has Derrick Henry, who's going to be another year older, and they're going to run him into the ground as much as humanly possible. The volume's not going to change at 32 years old. Eventually, they're going to have a new running back in place, and it sort of changes the scheme when you go away from a Henry. I mean, Henry's not going to be doing this at 35 years old. And you saw Lamar Jackson last year banged up. The rushing production went down a ton. I think that'll bounce back a little bit this year, but I don't think we're ever going to get back to a Lamar Jackson having 1,000 rushing yards. So I think getting wide receivers out on the field that can help him and convert first downs. You have Zay Flowers. You add another weapon in Makai Lemon here, who had 50 first down receptions this past year for USC. I know it's a player that you're not as high as some in the fantasy community, but how about the need filled with Baltimore, adding another dynamic wide receiver to Zay Flowers with Makai Lemon? Your thoughts on this one?
I would never use the word dynamic to describe Makai Lemon, but hey, I don't know. I don't love the fit, to be honest. Like Makai and Zay Flowers in the field together. I mean,
it's a little overlapping, right? It's a little overlapping.
It's a little overlapping. Just zero size whatsoever. Not a ton of juice with either guy either. So there's concerns there, but yeah, I mean, Declan with a hand-picked slot receiver is exciting, I guess, for fantasy, right? Because Makai's getting all the Amon-Ra comps. I don't think he's anywhere close to that, but whatever. If Declan Doyle views it that way, then cool.
Well, there we go. That's about as nice a thing as we'll get Brett Whitefield to say on this show. And let's keep it going, Brett. Let's pick with Tampa Bay before we break.
Okay. Tampa needs a lot, it feels like, for a team that's been relatively competitive the last years. I know the wheels fell off last season, however, but I think they're good at pass catcher, obviously. So let's pivot to the defensive side of the ball here. We're going to go – I think they really need some juice at pass rusher. They brought in Al-Qadim Muhammad, but he's a rotational guy at best, just a third down only type player. He can't play on early downs. Yaya Diaby had a pretty good season last year, but again, not stopping me from making a decision here. So I'm going to go with edge from Miami, Akheem Mesidor, one of the older players in the draft, but his tape is literally a man beating up small children. It's very good. I would argue he's got the best edge tape in the class. Just the real question mark is that age, right? So like, how much of a bump did he get because he's 25 years old beating up 20-year-olds? So, but he's awesome. They in the Tampa scheme too. They like one stand-up guy and then one power edge player. Akheem Mesidor gives in that power edge component to go along with Yaya Diaby.
Yeah, I love this pick. And Mesidor's a player we've been high on. I remember talking to you about him when we were down in Mobile and just how locked in he was. 15 seems about right. I think he would have been the pick for your Lions at 17 if he's there on the board. And I think a number of teams in this 15 through 20 range are going to say the name Akheem Mesidor. I think this is perfect, and it's a great fit for Tampa Bay. Now, Brett, this is an interesting one with the Jets, and they have a lot of picks in this draft. We had obviously 2 overall, where we projected them to get Rueben Bain, and then they have 16, and then they have the early second-round pick as well. So I think they have a lot of flexibility. Now, if Jordyn Tyson, the health reports were a little bit better, I think he would be a player that they would take. Ultimately, I think that they don't go in that direction. I think at 16, they're actually going to do it. For better or for worse, I think this is the Ty Simpson pick. And I think Ty Simpson, they might trade down a few spots if they can find a willing partner, get down to like that maybe 3-4 spots. I wonder if Pittsburgh is also in play for Ty Simpson, just based on the structure of their roster. But I think he goes somewhere in this range, for better or for worse. I have some reservations about him because of the lack of college starts. I don't think he's a player that I would love to, bank my fortunes on. But I know that there's a lot of scouts and some front office executives who view him in a very positive light. And I think ultimately he gets in the first round. And I think this is the spot.
Theo, I like it. I really love this. This is so first of all, you have to look at competition. Pittsburgh at 21, Cleveland at 24, the Rams, they no longer have that pick, but those two teams, Arizona with the early pick in the second round could try to come up as well. I think if you like Ty Simpson, you just have to take him. There's no let's wait and see. There's no trade back and take a teams don't do that. You like a quarterback, you take him. Quarterbacks are always worth the investment. The potential dart. If you hit on Ty Simpson, if he ends up being your guy, the rewards your franchise reaps for that is unspeakable compared to if you wait and then don't have a quarterback. So the fact that they brought in Geno Smith as a bridge QB also makes me excited about this. My big concern with Ty was that he'd come in with limited experience and then be thrown to the wolves and have to start right away in the NFL. I think Geno is a nice bridge quarterback to help Ty come along and develop. Now, I don't know that I trust the Jets to necessarily develop him correctly, but that's neither here nor there. I do really like this pick because they brought in Geno Smith as the bridge QB. Good job.
And I think also when you look at it where people say, I don't like using that first round pick, they don't have to move up. So they just stay on the clock here and they use the pick on Ty Simpson. And you brought up that they acquired Geno, only had to give up a 7th round pick to get Geno. So they don't have to move up, and they use the 7th round pick on the bridge quarterback. So really, this is sort of how you should do things at the NFL level. Again, I don't think Ty Simpson is a player that we need to fall in love with, but if he does go in this range of the draft and he has a clear runway to a starting position, enough offensive skill position talent there with Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and we'll see if they add another wide receiver in addition to Adonai Mitchell. They had Mason Taylor last year. Then I think Ty Simpson, you have to sort of suck it up and consider him at that 1-2 turn in Dynasty rookie drafts if he goes in this range. Brett, your Detroit Lions OTC at 17 here.
Yeah, this ended up being best case scenario for my Lions here. We're going to go offensive tackle Monroe Freeling from Georgia. I've been a big fan of him. He's a top 15 player on my board, has been since January. Extremely good athlete. Limited starting experience in college, so he's still going to have to go win the job. But the Lions have a big void right now at left tackle with the release of Taylor Decker. They brought in Larry Borum to kind of be that swing tackle, and I think Borum could start for them in a pinch. However, they need a significant long-term investment in that spot. It is one of the most important positions in football. So Monroe Freeling, for my money, he's the best left tackle in the draft. I think Mauigoa is the best overall tackle in the draft, but he plays the right side. So I'm in love with this pick here at 17.
Yeah, and it's a player that we've projected to go as high as 6 overall, and I think he is in play for the Cleveland Browns. You talk about the Drew Petzing run game, which had you very excited, and I know certainly it gets us very excited for fantasy football purposes with Jahmyr Gibbs, a chance to have his break fantasy type season. And I think adding a tackle of this level at 18 overall for Detroit should make everybody really excited about the chance for Drew Petzing to have a ton of success in year one as OC. Love the fit, love the player. And this is another pick here for me at 18, Brett, where it sort of falls perfectly for them. I'm going to go with safety for the Minnesota Vikings here at 18. I'm going to go with Dillon Thieneman, safety from Oregon. And it's interesting, Brett, that I've started to see some beat reporters saying that if Caleb Downs goes somewhere in the top 7-8 picks, then Dillon Thieneman could be in play for the Cincinnati Bengals at 10 overall, and there's a chance we see 2 safeties inside of the top 10. I know you had an incredibly high grade on Thieneman before the NFL Combine, and then the NFL Combine, he showed up and just wowed everybody. One of the best best performances at the Combine, regardless of position. So we get Dillon Thieneman, our second safety off the board at 18 overall. And Minnesota fills a glaring need.
Yeah, I love Dillon Thieneman. I mean, starting with his Purdue tape where he was primarily a deep safety, single high guy who just, it was basically air control out there, no fly zones. And then, going to Oregon, they moved him to the box. And usually a positions change like that is pretty dramatic for a player, but I think he got better. So there's a ton of reps of him in the slot, a ton of reps of him as the big overhang guy. Slash box safety, and he's phenomenal. He can literally do it all, similar to Caleb Downs in that regard, where they can do everything you ask them to do, and that's where all the value is in the NFL right now. Those defensive backs that can literally, I think you could play Dillon Thieneman outside corner. Honestly, he's that twitchy of an athlete. So whatever you need in your secondary, he can fill it.
Yeah, super super easy pick for us. The last two gets a little trickier with Carolina here at 19. You're on the clock, Brett.
Yeah, I'm tempted. I've kind of penciled this in as a potential Eli Stowers landing spot. If Sadiq were to go higher than this could also be a Sadiq landing spot if Sadiq hangs on the board for a little bit. But I'm going to pivot off that a little bit. I think they still need to work defense. Hold on. This is a really tough one.
It's a very tough one.
I'm going to go corner here. I'm going to go with Avieon Terrell, cornerback Clemson. I know people have Jermod McCoy a little higher. Avieon Terrell, though, is one of the better press man guys I've seen recently, and I think he fits the Isaiah Evero defense a little bit better. And they need a guy. Mike Jackson's been a fine corner, but I think you can put him in the nickel if you need to, or you can put him outside. I'm going to go Avieon Terrell, cornerback Clemson.
Yeah, that's an interesting pick, and it's a little higher than some may have had him. But I've had Terrell consistently inside the first round. I think he's going to end up going somewhere before pick 25 when it's all said and done. He's my cornerback 3 in this class. This makes my pick pretty easy, though. I think Dallas would have considered a corner at 12 overall. For them to get access to Jermod McCoy at 20 and walk away with Jermod McCoy and David Bailey as their 2 first-round picks, I think the whole organization is going to be ecstatic about that. McCoy, there's some people, I know not us, but they have McCoy as their cornerback 1 in this class ahead of Mansoor Delane. McCoy obviously had the injury that kept him out for this season, but was tremendous in 2024. And I think Dallas gets a slam dunk value here at 20. So we go a little bit of a run on cornerbacks here with Avieon Terrell off the board at 19 to Carolina and Jermod McCoy off the board at 20 to Dallas. Brett, you got another fun pick here. Pittsburgh Steelers, and this is one where I think fantasy managers have circled because this has been a potential quarterback landing spot, and then they end up with the Michael Pittman trade, which you think would sort of preclude them from going wide receiver, or does it? What way do you think Pittsburgh goes here at 21 overall?
They're one of the hardest teams to draft for in these mock drafts. It's still a really good competitive roster, and they find small ways to fill holes in free agency every year. They're loaded at safety. They're loaded at corner. I was looking at both of those spots before free agency. They fortified the interior D-line. They've got good edge rushers. Their offensive line's pretty good. It's they're really tough. They need a quarterback. Ty Simpson would be the pick, but I think I'm gonna go try to make some fantasy people happy, and I'm gonna go with Omar Cooper Jr. here. Again, Jordyn Tyson medicals. I'm assuming that scares some teams away. Obviously, I have him higher on my board than Omar Cooper Jr. But for what Pittsburgh needs specifically, and considering the medicals of Tyson, Omar Cooper slotting into that slot role where he can be a vertical slot player, run after catch threat to go with DK Metcalf and Pittman Jr., who are 2 big body guys. I think it's a really nice fit. And Pittsburgh, who's been devoid of talent at the wide receiver position for years, now is all of a sudden loaded up at wide receiver.
I love this pick, and I think Omar Cooper deserves to be in this range. Jordyn Tyson, I think, probably slides to the last couple picks of the first round, like the last 5-6 picks, based on this little hamstring thing. I also think Casey Concepcion, our guy, getting the little knee cleanup surgery, not going to scare teams off necessarily, but they're not going to love it. I think that he's also going to go in that range. I think that Cooper just becomes sort of a solid plug-and-play guy. I think teams are really going to like him. We've talked about him being a potential Rashee Rice type. And you look at what Pittsburgh will have next year with DK Metcalf, who's going to be 29, Michael Pittman also getting a little bit older, and then they add the young dynamic talent in Omar Cooper, a guy who can do a lot with yak. His yak ability could stand out on this offense. So I really like that fit. Omar Cooper goes off the board, and I think 22 is also going to be a wide receiver. And I think there's some fantasy managers that are going to love hearing this, and some won't love hearing this. But when you look at Mike McDaniel, the amount of offensive moves they've made this offseason, I don't think they're done yet. LA was mentioned in every single A.J. Brown trade rumor. There's always like, oh, it's going to be the New England Patriots. Oh, and the LA Chargers are also interested. Then Alec Pierce re-signs with Indianapolis, and everybody's like, oh, New England's going to get Alec Pierce. If it wasn't for them, he would have gone to New England, or he would have gone to Vegas. Oh, and the LA Chargers were ready to throw a massive bag at him. This is going to be Denzel Boston. Denzel Boston goes off the board at 22 overall. Brett, you've talked about Quentin Johnston being a potential trade candidate and a player that's due for an extension. They're going to pass on that. They're going to end up moving off of Quentin Johnston. They're sort of reset their tape here with Denzel Boston. They also have Trey Harris, who they drafted last year in round 2, and of course Ladd McConkey. Denzel Boston, a player that I think is very underrated right now. I know you've been extremely high on him. We talked about it on X, where I said he's going to go somewhere in this 20 through 35 range, and you're like, corrected me. He's going to go higher. 22, it seems about right for a player of this talent. So Washington wide receiver Denzel Boston, the Chargers. And Brett, there's always a surprise team who picks a wide receiver in round 1. It's never perfectly clean for us. I think it's LA. I think LA is the wide receiver landing spot this year.
Well, I love the player team fit, no doubt about that. So Boston's my wide receiver 3, by the way. I think he's awesome. I think the dude, I see so many people writing up like on Twitter, like bad athleticism. I'm like, he's not a bad athlete. Like he might not be a 4.3 guy, but he's not a bad athlete. He can jump out of the gym. He's explosive. The lateral quickness for his size is ridiculous. So I think he's awesome.
Yeah, I really like the Boston fit, and I like the landing spot here. You're back OTC at 23 overall, a team that also could be in the mix for a wide receiver, depending on what they have made internal decisions. So a lot of rumors out there. A.J. Brown's going to move after June 1, maybe gets moved during the NFL draft. It seems like it's a fluid situation. Could Philadelphia be in the mix for a wide receiver as well?
They could be, but I think I'm going to have them wait. I think there's a sprint to the podium pick right here. In light of they just traded their starting box safety, Sidney Brown. There happens to be a player on the board who fits that position perfectly, and he played with their star corner, Quinyon Mitchell, in college. I'm going to go with Toledo safety, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. This is a Howie special, just an absolute, just cleaning up when other teams pass on great players. This is a turnover machine. This guy forced 9 fumbles the last 2 years of college football. He's got a slew of picks, ball production. You can move him around the formation. They need that other safety. I know they brought back Marcus Epps on a 1-year deal, but he's more of a backup, rotational backup that plays special teams really well. This is a Howie special if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, it's a great fit. We've talked about him. We've consistently had McNeil-Warren mocked inside of round 1. Really nice fit and landing spot with Philadelphia here at 23. 24 overall, Brett. I think there's going to be some people in the room in Cleveland kind of saying, maybe we could have waited on wide receiver and addressed offensive line earlier, but I had them taking Carnell Tate. So at 24 overall, Jordyn Tyson's still on the board. They're not double tapping. I think ultimately going back to the offensive line and going with an offensive tackle, we've talked about a couple guys going off the board, but one player who seems to be trending towards being a first-round selection or being a top 10 pick in the second round is Clemson tackle Blake Miller. I'm going to take Blake Miller here at 24 overall, Brett. Your thoughts on this fit and this player selection?
I don't trust Blake to switch to the left side. Now, I don't know if Titus Howard can play the left side, but one of those guys is going to have to play the left side. So if Cleveland signs off on feeling good about that, I mean, Titus Howard just got an extension and it was left tackle-ish money, so maybe they view him as a left tackle. I don't know, but he hasn't played left tackle in a long time, where Blake Miller has pretty much only played right tackle in his career. I think he's got maybe 100 career snaps at left tackle starting there in a pinch. So I'm a little unsure. I definitely see the vision. I probably would have went Kadyn Proctor, though, to get that true left tackle there.
Yeah, Proctor definitely in play as well. Massive guy. We'll talk about Proctor. I'm sure he's going to go in the first round here. I'd be surprised if he doesn't. What way are you going here at Chicago?
I got to peek Chicago's needs real quick. They're another tough one. They've offensive line's pretty. You know what? Let's do it right now. Let's go Kadyn Proctor, left tackle, Alabama. They don't really have a left tackle. They're currently slated to start Theo Benedict. I know they drafted Ozzie Trapillo in the second round last year. That seems to have not worked great. I feel like he got in Ben Johnson's doghouse pretty quick. So we're going to go Kadyn Proctor, left tackle, Alabama, who gives them an athletic, just freak specimen at left tackle, a real traitsy guy. But ultimately, he's a mauler in the run game, and that's where Ben Johnson's offense, that's the starting point for it. He wants early down success in the run game. They're going to keep the trend going with the rebuilt IOL from last year, adding a premium tackle here.
Yeah, this is a really, really great pick. I'm having a little FOMO. 360-pounder in Kadyn Proctor that's athletic. So Bruce Feldman's freaks list guy, a guy we've talked about for months and months and months. Blake Miller and Kadyn Proctor go back-to-back, tackle. All right, Brett, we are in the end game here. We're towards the end of the first round here, and this is just the dream landing spot. The slide ends. Jordyn Tyson is a Buffalo Bill, a player who has some Stephon Diggs-like tendencies, ends up being linked to Josh Allen. So the Bills enter the offseason with a glaring need at wide receiver. They end up going DJ Moore, and then they double tap it. They trade for DJ Moore, and then they double tap it. They take Jordyn Tyson. I think a lot of people will be very, very excited about this landing spot. And I think adding Tyson and Moore, that's a pretty exciting offseason for a team that really needed an upgrade at wideout.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's Tyson, down here is pretty juicy value, especially if the medicals end up checking out. Do you worry at all? Like that's their first and second round pick this year.
It's excessive. It's excessive, but it was also a long time coming and a team that really, really needed it. And also, Brett, it's talking about this is the Josh Allen peak years. You're talking about what is Josh Allen's wide receiver room going to look like at 30, 31, 32. You get him a chance to attach him to Jordyn Tyson. I think DJ Moore was a smart and calculated acquisition. I don't love the fact that they give up a second rounder for him, but that's the market. And so adding Moore and Tyson, I think those two guys can coexist well with one another. I think that's a really fun room. And then you add in Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir, James Cook at running back. There's a ton of juice at the skill positions for Josh Allen. This is a team that really needed. They just fired Sean McDermott, so they've set the bar extremely high. They need to push the chips in here and maximize what they're going to get out of their all-pro quarterback in Allen.
Yeah, that hurts the 49ers here because 49ers need some wide receiver help. But there's still one on the board, Theo.
Yes, there's still a very fun one on the board.
My guy, my wide receiver 2 in the class, who it would just fit past trends. If the 49ers take Concepcion, who was my guy, that would be their 4th that they've taken, and Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Ricky Pearsall, and now Casey Concepcion, wide receiver, Texas A&M. My wide receiver 2 in the class. And by the way, my working comp for him is Brandon Ayuk. So, man, we're just really doubling up on all the cliches here. I love this.
Yeah, and just a quick recap of our fantasy landing spots so far for wide receivers. Carnell Tate goes at 6 overall to the Cleveland Browns. I think that the fantasy community will sort of get behind it, not be super excited about it, but it's like automatic wide receiver 1. Makai Lemon goes to Baltimore. I think people are not going to be that excited about this one because Zay Flowers is a very, very good player, some overlapping skill sets, and it's a team where even if Declan Doyle vastly increases the pass volume, it's still a team that we would project to be probably bottom 10 in pass attempts based on the presence of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. Then we ended up having kind of a run here on wide receivers. Omar Cooper goes off the board at 21. The community also will be like lack of strong quarterback play, and there's 2 veteran wide receivers there in DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman. Cooper will be a player people will take, but they're not going to be head over heels for that one. And then Denzel Boston lands with the Chargers, where Ladd McConkey is there. On paper, Quentin Johnston's still there, and then of course Oronde Gadsden, people are betting on him. Now you start talking about the really fun landing spots. Jordyn Tyson at 26, Casey Concepcion at 27. People are going to be ecstatic about those ones. Ecstatic. And even with San Francisco adding Mike Evans at his age, it's sort of a short-term proposition. And then Ricky Pearsall can't stay on the field. So Jordyn Tyson to Buffalo at 26, Casey Concepcion 27, San Francisco. Fantasy community would be thrilled, I think, with those 2 landing spots. Even though it's a little bit lower for Tyson, I think people would trade off on having Tyson attached to Josh Allen. And also, Brett, there's sort of a feeling that DJ Moore, is he the wide receiver 1? Tyson in year 2 versus DJ Moore as an older player, it might be Tyson sort of taking over there as a wide receiver 1. So really interesting landing spots for us. 28 overall for Houston. Another sort of interesting team to try to project which way they go. Ultimately, I think this is an interior defensive lineman, and I think they lean into a strength here. A player that we projected to go a lot higher. I think this is Peter Woods. I think Peter Woods of Clemson, the slide stops, and he goes at Houston at 28. But I think realistically, they have a ton of options here of which way they could go and sort of build on a strength. Guys like Caden McDonald, guys like Lee Hunter. They could even go with an edge rusher here and just take one of these edge rushers that we think are very high-level prospects here. So I think Houston's in really good shape here at 28, but ultimately goes Peter Woods, defensive lineman from Clemson, a player who could conceivably go 14, 15 picks earlier. But Brett, he's sort of been hiding out throughout a lot of the evaluative process. Do you care about some of the lack of drills he's participated in, some of the lack of testing that he's been willing to participate in, or is that something that you're baking in?
Well, it is a little concerning, especially when you consider 2025 tape was a precipitous drop from where he was in 24. And then he's not doing any of the testing, any of the on-field drills. There's not necessarily an injury disclosure we're aware of here. So I'm a little shocked by his process so far, but I think this is right. I think this is where he's probably going to go, maybe even a little later as a result of this. So this is definitely the right range for him.
Yeah, it's an interesting player because when we first started doing this, it's a player that we projected to go inside like the top 10 at times. So a couple months ago, we thought this legitimately would be a top 10 talent. So I think if you're Houston, devil's advocate to some of the red flags we talked about is, hey, this is a player that maybe this front office graded the same way we did and is looking at, hey, we got a potential all-pro and kind of sift through the red flags and say glass half full tape. We're adding a potential impact player to one of the league's best defensive front sevens, one of the best defenses in the NFL. So I think ultimately the slide ends right about this range. 29 overall, Kansas City, you've got some really good options as well.
Yeah, I do. And what's interesting about Woods going 28 is that was the first interior defensive lineman off the board in this mock. And that's about right where I have all four of these guys: Caden McDonald, Lee Hunter, Peter Woods, Caleb Banks. I don't have a first-round grade on any of them, but they are all in my top 32. I know that it's, for those that don't understand, first-round grades don't necessarily equate top 32. So,
well, let's backtrack on that, Brett, just to clarify, because you hear a lot of people like yourself talking about that this time of year. How many first-round grades do I have in this draft class? How many first-round grades do you currently have when you look at this draft class overall when you're looking at your big board?
I have 17 first-round grades.
And I think that's about
that
in
won't
line.
Change.
Yeah, I think that's about in line with where people have this class. What would be like the most you've graded in the last couple of years? Is there a number that jumps out to you? Did you
I think that as high as I got was like 22. I think that was the highest I've ever had.
Okay, so we're a little bit below average, but below like a peak for you. So 17 first-round grades just creates a little bit of a people like, hey, come on, guys, But I think that's something where I think people that do big boards, they will talk about that. And I think it's an interesting way of looking at classes. It also shows sort of just how wide open this class could be, really, Brett, when you get from picks 20 through 40. It's going to be a lot of fun for us to cover it.
Yeah, there's about like in my scoring system, I got like 30 guys after that first 17 that could all go from like 18 to 50. Like it's pretty wide open. So, if your team picks a player at pick 30 that you didn't necessarily love, he's probably graded similarly than all the guys you wanted anyways. So, all right. But with that said, so I was thinking initially interior defensive line, but I do see an edge here that I think Kansas City would have to swing for, and that's Kendrick Faulk, the young stud athlete from Auburn. He's got just a really enticing set of physical traits here. I know he's got some development needed, but man, he's a big, long, physical, athletic freak who can play on the inside on passing downs. He can, be your edge setter on rundowns, and we know Kansas City really values getting to those pass downs. So they firmly believe in you have to earn the right to rush the passer, and Faulk helps them with that. They lost Mike Dana, who was their big power edge setter. Now they're relying on Ashton Jalot, a third-round pick from last year. So I really do think Faulk is a great fit here, and I just don't think Kansas City is the type of team that would pass on the raw talent at pick 29. This is a guy who could go as high as like 10, for God's sakes, So at pick 29, it's a really nice fit.
Yeah, this is a really it's a great value. So Woods and Faulk were players that we've talked about potentially going in the top 10 a couple months ago. Faulk is a huge player and also checks a tons of boxes athletically. So really, really fun one. I'm OTC here with Miami, and they have so many picks, Brett, that I think you sort of can. For me, I'm almost throwing, positional need out the window because they have so many here. So I'm looking at the players available, and I'm saying to myself, who can be a foundational pick for us to build around? Maybe a 3-year type bet. And I think it ultimately comes to the value on the board. And I think the value on the board is edge rusher and then some of those defensive linemen like you talked about. So I look at Miami. The front seven has some decent talent on it, but I think adding another potential just set it and forget it type in the front seven is the way that they're going to go. So it comes down to interior defensive lineman versus edge rusher. I think this is TJ Parker. I think TJ Parker doesn't slide out of the first round. I like Cashius Howell, but he's a bit smaller. I think TJ Parker, edge rusher from Clemson, goes 30 overall here, but it just feels like a completely wide open type pick. I also think Eli Stowers could have been in the mix right here but I think ultimately they go with the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I like that for sure. I think Max Ihenature would be in the mix as well, but Parker's a really nice compliment to Chop Robinson. They're more speed, dip and rip edge rusher where, Parker's going to be more of an edge setter. Kind of replaces what Bradley Chubb gave that team for many years, is that big physical strong presence. So I like the fit there. So this is my last pick of the mock here.
Yeah, you're done. You're done after this one.
All right, let's do it. Let's make some fantasy people happy here. Let's make the Scott Barretts and the Ryan Heaths of the world happy. We're going to go Vanderbilt tight end Eli Stowers to play this pass catching extraordinary role. I know we'd like another true wide receiver one for Drake May, but you're basically getting that here with Eli Stowers. I think his tape as a pass catcher is probably more impressive than Kenyon Sadiq's even. Obviously, he doesn't necessarily profile as an every down player right now, so I do think they have to be a little bit mindful of that. But you talk about a team that has a Hunter Henry, has what they brought in was Julian Hill, blocking tight end from Miami. So they have the blocking type tight ends, and now you're getting a true pass game weapon. Josh McDaniels has known how to use two tight end sets as good as any play caller in the NFL for a long time, going back to his days with Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez. So I really like this fit here, and we get Drake May some help at pass catcher, not in the form of a wide receiver, but basically a big wide receiver.
I love this one, and you'll make me very happy with this landing spot too, because if you look at New England, the key to a tight end being fantasy relevant is being able to be the number 1 or number 2 target on his team. People are going to give you really complicated ways for tight end success in fantasy, Brett, but that's really the simplistic way, and it comes. It's like scientific. If you're the number 1 or number 2 target on your team as a tight end in fantasy football, you've got a chance to be a weekly starter and a chance to be a fantasy impact player. And Eli Stowers, when you look at the makeup of this roster, there's a chance he's pushing for 90 plus, maybe 100 targets as a rookie. But I think in year 2, he takes off big time. And I think that role becomes expanded. You could be a 125, 135 target guy in this offense at the tight end position. Then you're talking about maybe a top 5 scorer in fantasy. So you end up with dream landing spots with Eli Stowers at New England. And then Kenyon Sadiq, year 1 with Kelsey could be annoying, but it's a dream landing spot going top 10 overall with Patrick Mahomes. So 2 tight ends inside the first round, 3 safeties and 2 tight ends inside the first round, Brett.
Well, to add to your Stowers point too, right now he projects as not an every down player. But what you see on tape at Vandy is a very willing blocker out of the slot, a guy who's willing to locate, latch, and try to strain through a sustained block. He needs to get bigger and stronger. And you see the frame, he's huge. He's got long limbs. He could add 10 pounds comfortably and not sacrifice an ounce of athleticism if he does it right. And so I think you're right, where year 1, maybe he is more of that 60% route share kind of guy, but then year 2 puts a little weight on the frame. He has the athleticism to play through that. All of a sudden you have an every down tight end, and that guy's a monster for fantasy.
Yeah, I love this fit. 32, Seattle, last pick of the round. I'm going to call out and I'm going to say that this is a team that I think trades out of round 1 into the early portion of round 2. So you start looking at the teams in the first 10 picks in round 2. Some of these edge rushers, you've got the Cashius Howells, the Caden McDonalds, Caleb Banks, and then C.J. Allen. There's certainly going to be a number of teams very much into C.J. Allen. You brought up Maxi Iheanacho, the offensive tackle from Arizona State. Those sort of players, I think there'll be a market for trade up. But ultimately, I think Seattle moves down, and I think Jadarian Price will be the first player that they select somewhere inside the top 40 overall picks. We've seen a couple of people projecting them to select Jadarian Price at 32. Ultimately, I don't think that'll happen. I would like for it to happen. It makes it more relevant for fantasy. But ultimately, I think the 32nd overall pick will end up being Cashius Howell, high motor, high productive guy for Texas A&M, edge rusher. Howell could go a little higher than this, but Cashius Howell goes here at 32 overall. And if it is Seattle and they stay on the pick, they're just going to take the best player available, and I think this fits the mold as well. Your thoughts on Howell and his potential at 32? Do you think he's going to go higher? Do you think this is a player that Seattle could consider?
I don't know where the NFL is going to land on Howell. I think some of his tape is really good. I mean, talk about speed. He's got a couple ghost rush moves that are just phenomenal. He's got bend. He can get to a quarterback quickly. So I definitely think Howell has the chops to go in the round one, but you talk about the size issues, the length issues. I don't know. I think this is probably a good range for him, though.
Yeah, it's interesting. And now a couple of very interesting players still on the board. Guys like McDonald, guys like Banks. A big run on wide receivers in this round as well. Brett, we expect a few more wide receivers to go in round 2 early on as sort of we start seeing the NFL cleaning things up in those top 50 picks. Talked about Jadarian Price. We think he'll probably go in the first 40 or 50 picks as well at the running back position. This is a lot of fun. Let me know what you have coming out, Brett, and updates on any of the work over at fantasypoints.com.
Yeah, Prospect Guide is out. Go check it out. Theo helped with some of the fantasy outlook, or all of the fantasy outlook for the skill players. So make sure you check that out. We did, top QBs, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends start. I'll be continuing to add to those players. We'll get you 20 of each when it's all said and done. And then stay tuned. We got O-line, all the defensive players coming as well. So it's pretty much a sprint from now until the draft. You can also check out my podcast, First Read with Joe Marino. We're doing deep positional dives. And then we're firing Film versus Analytics back up, too, with Scott Barrett, and that should be a fun
Yeah,
thing
make sure you check out everything Brett does with Scott on Film versus Analytics. Always it's appointment viewing if you want to get these deep dives into these fantasy-relevant 2026 NFL rookie prospects. Make sure you also check out Fantasy Football Daily, anywhere you get your podcast. Recent episodes I record with Matt Harmon, JJ Zachariason. Also check out School of Scott Barrett and myself. Rich Haribar joined us on the most recent episode. And then if you're watching us on Fantasy Points YouTube, make sure you're also subscribed to Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. Sigmund Bloom joined me this week over on Dynasty Life. Always fun chopping it up with him. Also, the Dynasty Points is over there. We're everywhere here at Fantasy Points. Make sure you check out Brett's prospect guide over at fantasypoints.com and stick with us here through the NFL draft up into rookie draft season. We're going to help you crush your fantasy leagues this season.